Welcome to the Faithful Fireside Podcast.
So, I know we wanted to talk about like St. Patrick's Day and St. Patrick a little bit today because St. Patrick's Day is March 17th. So this episode will probably air like right after.
Yeah.
Yeah, like right after St. Patrick's
No,
Day.
before. Maybe we'll move it up.
Okay. So we'll try and get this one out in time for St. Patrick's Day, which will be good. That's one of those days that is managed to survive in the kind of popular imagination, like Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
There's always St. Valentine's Day, and everybody has to go get chocolates and go on dates and get drunk.
Will this be your first year to partake in St. Patrick's Day?
Yeah, we have to talk about how to like celebrate St. Patrick's Day because I
drink green beer, Ryder.
Is that what you do? Yeah, see, that's what we need to talk about because
unfortunately, it's usually restaurants like Old Keg they're just trying to get rid of, so they diet.
Yeah, I think that's like, for me, I grew up more on I wasn't even really evangelical. I was kind of evangelical because I grew up as part of the Restoration movement. So it's like Churches of Christ and First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and that was on both sides of my family. So in the Restoration movement churches or Stone Campbell movement churches, their sort of vision and mission is to restore the early church as it was. And the idea is not so much that you could just go to Catholicism or Orthodoxy to get that. It's to kind of go before there ever was a creed, read the Bible plainly, and then just live according to that, which is not possible. But that's kind of the idea, is to go back and do that. And so, like, I think that the creed, there is a creed, but the creed is more or less no creed but Christ is the creed.
Gotcha.
And so you can drink in that setting because there's other evangelical settings that are more anti-alcohol, like, certain shades of Baptist maybe. So we weren't
all of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I wasn't like growing up in like an anti-alcohol setting, but there's something about it that it wasn't something that I was interested in doing, and so after becoming Catholic, it was kind of like, okay, cool, I can smoke and drink now. There was a real piece of that, which was cool though, because becoming Catholic gave me the opportunity to kind of like, without any sort of guilt or without wondering if it was good or not, to sit down and drink a beer with my dad, for the first time, and with my mom, and so that was kind of a really cool thing we got to do before moving up here, or moving down here from where I was living.
I know I've told you this, and here I am growing up, cradle Catholic, part Italian. I can remember being like 5 or 6 and having my own little wine glass.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
at special holidays.
Because you're part Italian, so you've drank since you were 5 years old, and you've also probably killed some people. Or I guess, is that Sicilian? Is that not fair?
It's more of the South mob.
Okay.
Stuff, yeah.
Right. I remember John Paul II wasn't a big fan of Sicily. I'd read his Witness to Hope. That book is not his book, the book about his life, right? Yeah. The autobiography, George Weigel's biography. And there was distinctly, I remember a part in there about John Paul II and Sicily. So,
well, I mean, that sticks to what my grandma says. Like, nothing south of Rome is real Italy.
So. Shots fired. We have European listeners. I don't know if we have any that are actually in alleged parts of Italy or not, but it'll be interesting.
So next Tuesday or Wednesday is St. Patrick's Day?
What day is the 17th?
I think it's Tuesday.
Yeah, let's look at that.
So does that mean we're going to celebrate?
We should.
Yeah.
We definitely should. And we'll talk a little bit when we kind of get into the episodes, like the meat of the episode, when that would be, like different ways you might go about doing that.
Cool.
Okay. So that'll be kind of
sounds great.
Yeah.
So and you've got some decent notes prepared.
Yeah, I've got some stuff. I think what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about St. Patrick's life first,
Okay.
and then we can talk a little bit about myths and legends and hagiography associated with St. Patrick, and then that'll be kind of fun to go over because that's what most people probably have heard. And then we can talk about the holiday, and I've got a couple references from things that he wrote. What's kind of interesting about St. Patrick is we actually have some stuff that he legitimately wrote, and we're talking like 6th century, 5th and 6th century, like a long time ago, or 4th and 5th century. Sorry,
That's
not
cool.
6th, 4th and 5th. So it's a little unusual. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have something that was actually written by him from that time frame.
Okay.
Okay, so, we'll get into it. Patrick's story, he was actually a Roman Briton, which is interesting because that's one misconception is he's Irish. He wasn't Irish.
Right.
So the Romans actually conquered all the way west, not necessarily north, right? There's like Germany and those areas. They never really conquered those areas, which is why the barbarians always gave them trouble. The barbarians were like my ancestors, basically. The the Visigoths and the Vandals and then the Huns, which,
Okay.
were not necessarily my ancestors. But the Huns is a major threat throughout like all of Europe. So they never really get up north, but they go all the way out west. So they conquer France, they're in Spain, they get to the British Isles.
Do they do Portugal too, or
They get like all the way over.
I guess
and
that
then up.
connects right down or it doesn't connect, but it's close to.
It doesn't. Yeah, it's
North
close.
Africa,
Yeah, and then so
Which that makes
they were
sense.
all through Africa. And so they conquer that whole area, and they go up to Britain, but they never make it to Ireland. Ireland is the end of the world
Okay.
on the north side, in that imagination, like in that way of viewing the world. Ireland is like the edge of the world. They never quite get there. But Patrick is living in what might be, Scotland or, on the British side, never over Ireland. And that makes him a Roman Briton. Okay. So he actually is descended from an already religious family. So he has a dad who was a deacon and his grandfather was a priest. So they already had like clerical stuff in their family, which is super cool.
Okay.
I don't know much about those two, so we're not going to kind of dig into that, but that's kind of interesting. Patrick himself was not at this time particularly faithful, so he was a teenager, and he hadn't really owned his faith yet, so he's like in it and around it, but he's not like gripped by it. He calls himself a sinner, most unlearned, and the least of all the faithful, when referencing like this time in his life. So when he's 16 years old, he gets kidnapped by Irish pirates. Okay, so this is now a pirate story. Did you think this was going to be a pirate story?
No. But now I'm interested.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, his family estate, these Irish raiders come in and take him and goes across the sea. He's in Ireland now. And when he gets there, they sell him as a slave, and he is a shepherd. So he's a slave shepherd for like 6 years. So he's like living in the isolated countryside. He's exposed to cold and hardships and starving, right? Doesn't have a whole lot of food.
Daily misogi.
Daily misogi. Yes, misogi. Shameless plug for book club.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they did. During that time, he is, forced. When you get immersed like that, you pick up a language very quickly because your brain realizes it has to. So he learns Irish and he gets it.
Still young. Your brain's still developing.
Yeah, right.
That's cool.
And so he gets exposure to like the religious landscape with like the Druids that are there, Irish paganism, like what that sort of looks like, and he becomes sort of familiar with all that. And during that time, this is something I think God probably wants to do to everybody in some sense. Like during that time where there was a trial by fire or a tribulation or a crucible that you're kind of going through, Patrick starts to pray a lot. There's like nothing else to do other than take care of sheep and pray. So his faith starts to become more of his own during this exile. And that's a pattern you see in the Bible all the time, right? So it's like you'll have the Israelites, being faithful. They get saved from Egypt. They have their like death and rebirth as a people crossing the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, and then they come into the Promised Land and they're new. And as long as they keep the covenant and keep faith with God, and they get to keep the land. If not, they become exiles in the land, and then in that crucible they get refined and they return to the land, and this cycle of exile. Right. And so that's sort of what's happening in this time. So 6 years in, he's praying, and this personal faith is like growing in him, and he has a dream, and in that dream he hears a voice, and the voice tells him that there's a ship ready for him and that it's time to go to it. Okay. So we're about to have the anti-pirate thing. He wakes up, he travels, and it's like a long way to go from where he is to the shore. I don't know what the exact right distance is, but like many, many miles, like a long way. And so he takes this, he flees, long, dangerous journey, gets on the ship, like no kidding. There's actually a ship there. And the people like let him on the boat, take him back to Britain, where he's from. And he's, back with his family. They reunite and everything seems awesome and happy. And what's kind of nuts.
How many years passed from his kidnap to return?
6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 6 years. So he's like early 20s now. And he like goes home, and after some amount of time, which I don't know exactly, but after some amount of time, he has another dream. Okay. So Patrick's famously one of these dreamers, where God speaks to him in his sleep. And he has another dream, and there's this man in his dream from Ireland, and begs him basically to come walk among us again, like come back to Ireland. And so he interprets this dream, and his interpretation of the dream is the Holy Spirit is like come to him and calling him to be a missionary to Ireland, to the people that once enslaved him. So that is like the central dramatic moment of his life, right? Like if you're going to interpret him, it's a return to the land of slavery as not in vengeance, but in charity, right? I'm going to come back. I'm going to evangelize the people that hurt me. So he doesn't go immediately necessarily. He actually he doesn't leave for Ireland immediately, but he does spiritual formation. So he may have gone to Gaul, which is France.
Okay.
And studied there, like under Saint Germanus or some other figures, which would be, that's another episode. But he does do his faith formation and spiritual formation and vocational formation, and then eventually he gets ordained a priest and then consecrated as a bishop. So when he's a bishop, that's when he actually goes back to Ireland. So he's like a full-fledged bishop at that point. He goes to Ireland. This is probably like 432 or something like that. So we're in like early 5th century. He goes mainly to like the north and western portions from what I've seen, what I was able to find. And he preaches, baptizes, and he finds churches and monasteries, which is a really interesting thing about like the spread of Christianity in Ireland is like there's a real emphasis on building monasteries as they do that, and then monasteries like spreading out and building monasteries. So it's not so much like centralized in Ireland on the cathedral, which is in a city. They're more centralized in like rural monasteries So there's a little bit of a distinction in emphasis.
Was there already some Christianity in Ireland?
Yes, that's another actual common misconception, is that a lot of people will think that Patrick was the very first Christian there, and he's not. So he's the most effective one for sure. But you also have like the success of Christianity tends to spread in waves, right? Like there will be people who go, there'll be like the first guy who goes, he'll get martyred. They'll put him in the ground. We'll talk about foundation sacrifices at some point because I am obsessed with them. But, then there will be more, right? And then so there will be sort of a foothold or a beachhead of Christianity, so to speak, that will tend to grow. So usually it takes multiple passes, right, before it really takes root. So when Patrick comes in, he at being a bishop is very important. He actually ordains local clergy, right? He trains natives, and then he kind of pushes out into the farther reaches, right, where there would never had been any Roman rule or influence. And so he just happens to be really successful. And so it doesn't mean it was like without any pain. There were definitely times where he faced hostility and pagan druids and chieftains. There's a lot in later like hagiographic texts, which we would probably want to cover like one of those stories at a time. But you'll have
What does that mean again?
It's like a wisdom story.
Wisdom story.
Yeah. So the idea is it's a genre of religious literature that is similar to like myth and legend, but it's about a saint.
Okay.
And the idea is to read this story, which is some elements are going to be like the kernel of truth, then dramatized, right? So that you can glean the wisdom out of it in big, memorable ways. And then other things are just going to be, that's what happened, right? So there's some blend in the hagiography. It's not what we think of as like contemporary biography where like literally, or even history, literally every single one of these things literally happened. It's every single one of these things is the spiritual reality of what was happening. So that's why we use a different term.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So later hagiography will add, more details into showdowns with pagans or, whatnot. Okay. So Patrick himself will talk about like opposition that he had and like his confession. The Confessio is what Latin, right, for that. But there's like the Confession of St. Patrick, just like there's the Confession of St. Augustine. So St. Patrick will talk about opposition that he faced, imprisonment, constant danger for the sake of the gospel and stuff like that the entire time that he's there. Now, there's also a letter that he wrote that was a denouncing like some Christian slave raiders that carried off his Irish converts at one point in time. So he's like, there's danger for sure. There's lots of tumult. But anyway, so he's doing his mission, and one of the things I think that was like the most fascinating about it, he never goes home. He never returns. So like he goes to Ireland as a missionary and gives up all of his whole self and dies there, right? Never returns. So he works among the Irish, serves until death, and his death is traditionally March 17th, which is why that's St. Patrick's Day, because the saints' feast is usually associated with their death day, which is their birth into eternal life day. Birthdays weren't as important as they are now to most people, you know, way back when. So he probably... he dies at Saul or near Downpatrick, which is interesting, is the idea. So the guess is maybe about 461 or something.
Okay.
So mid 5th century. And then by the 7th century, he's already like venerated as like the principal saint of Ireland. So he's got so much influence that it's, nigh 100, 200 years later, and he's like the guy that everybody remembers, despite the fact that he wasn't actually the first guy there. He was just the most successful.
Are there churches there that have some of his remains?
I don't know. That would be kind of interesting to know about. Like,
I think we'll be going in a couple of years.
You guys are going to Ireland?
Because Katie went in 20.
I'm jealous.
I forget what year she went.
I bet you there are. I'm going to look this up.
But yeah, she loved it there, and she wants to go back for her 40th.
You're not supposed to say anything about your wife's age on the podcast.
She keeps talking about it.
Okay.
We're going to take the girls when they turn 18 so they can drink there.
Okay, so most traditions hold that St. Patrick's bodily remains are buried at Down Cathedral in Downpatrick, County Down, North Ireland. Yeah, so
Cool.
there are several places in Ireland and abroad where there are some relics. So that makes sense. That's what you would expect.
Cool. I'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, so there's quite a few things. So yeah, if you go you should be able to visit St. Patrick, venerate his relics there, which would be really super cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main sort of arc of his life. You got any other questions or thoughts on that before we?
I mean, minus the pirates and kidnapping, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Stanley Rother.
Yeah,
Like going and
Yeah.
being a missionary and then going back home and then being like, no, I can't stay here.
can't
I have
stay
to
here.
go. And then, yeah.
dude, solid. I'm proud of you. That was
How did Patrick die?
I don't actually know the answer to that. He wasn't martyred. He thought that
He wasn't.
he was not
Okay.
martyred.
Okay.
He was ready to be martyred. It just never happened. So let me look that up.
And roughly how old was he when he died?
So it depends. So this is a bunch of stuff we don't necessarily know because that was a long time ago. So we don't really know exactly how he died. He almost certainly died on March 17th because that's like his feast day, like we were talking about. But some say he might have died in like the 460s, but then there are scholars who thinks he died in like the 490s. So the answer is we don't know. We don't know the
Plus
answer
or
to this.
minus 30 years.
Yes.
Or 15 or 20.
And there are some sources that say he died at 70 or 80, but then there's like some hagiographical traditions. There's like he was 120 years old.
So
but
he
we
at least
don't
hit
know.
50-ish.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. I think that's reasonable. Yeah. But we don't actually know any of that, and
Where
we're
is
just
his
not sure.
journal? No, I'm just...
Well, the Confessio is his journal, right? Basically, but he was alive when he wrote it,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that it'd be interesting if there's anybody who's like a major St. Patrick scholar or anybody who's listening to this, like if they have thoughts on that, because it's not super obvious to us what happened to him. But from some of the research I'd done, he wasn't martyred. Okay. So now I thought it would be kind of fun. We talked a little bit about what we sort of know from history and what we can kind of glean from looking back. We want to talk about stories, myths, and misconceptions. Now you hit on some of them already, which is kind of cool. But I think the most famous thing is that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland, right? So
Yeah.
St. Patrick drives all the snakes out. I did some research. So the idea is he comes and he preaches and all the snakes like flee into the sea and drown themselves, basically. And therefore Ireland is snake free. But I think there's just ever since the last ice age, there just were never snakes there, right? So there was kind of an explanation, why are there no snakes? But there no snakes natively colonized the island. So there's just no snakes. That's probably like the real story, the realest of the real story. But that legend of Patrick is still applicable because you take the symbolic reading of that, and snakes tend to symbolize, the demonic or treachery. And that's because you have like in the garden, you have like the word Nahash, which is snake. Forgive my pronunciation, but it's a snake. Or it could be like a shining one or a deceptive one, depending on how you render the Hebrew there. And it's hard, and you lose that when you translate into English. But it really is kind of all three of those things at the same time is what's meant. Because in Hebrew, there's no vowels. until later. They add these points on how to pronounce them, like little symbols underneath the Hebrew characters, but you just draw the consonants. So the way that you render it can have certain different meanings. Is this a verb? Is it an adjective? Is it supposed to be a participle of some kind? And that will kind of, a snake could be also rendered as a shining one because they have scales that kind of, glimmer a little bit if you shine light on them and stuff like that, right? And then it can also be deceptive because the snake is treacherous and it writhes, it's not something that's just solid and fixed in place. It has to kind of wriggle on the ground, right? That makes us think of like deception, right? You snake.
I mean, the snake oil salesman.
Right. Exactly. That's all as old as time, So if Patrick comes and he preaches, then this snake, which is a symbol of a deceptive demon or like the shining Lucifer or whatever, is driven away at the preaching of the gospel. That's like your symbolic reading of that story, right? Mm-hmm. So truth operates on multiple levels, and the symbolic reading that covers this like abstract understanding, the patterns that can be applied in multiple places, is actually like the higher form of truth than just the simple like factual, this is what happened, because it doesn't tell me what it means, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably the thing with the snakes. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard both. Or like, I have a friend who's a historian. I think he always said it was like him driving away the pagan Druids and all that.
Yeah, that's definitely the more the symbolic read on it, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. What else? What other?
Okay, so there's another one where he teaches the Trinity to the pagans using a shamrock, which is the 3-leaf clover, right? So he picks it up. There's one shamrock, it has 3 leaves, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We don't have anything historically that proves that he did that. Like, he didn't write that he did that. And again, this is an interesting thing about Patrick, is we actually have stuff he did write, right? Not necessarily a lot, but some. So he never references that himself. So if you're the historian guy, you're like, well, we don't have hard evidence about that. Did he do that? I don't know. We don't know if he did that. However, it's a super good illustration, right? And I think I'm one who tends to favor hagiographic and legendary and mythic tellings. I tend to assume there's more truth in them than falsity, because I don't have like I'm not riddled with doubt, right?
Sure.
Or with a post-enlightenment worldview, that kind of stuff. I don't have that brain cancer, basically. So, did he do that? Somebody did, right? And the idea came to them from Patrick somehow,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, which is kind of cool, because that's another thing whenever we think about these sorts of stories and these kinds of material. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living, right? So we say that the saints are alive. So it may be that it wasn't really Patrick that did this, but somebody else and one of his spiritual sons did, and Patrick gave them the idea, And in that way, when we tell the story in our faith, we can say, actually, it was St. Patrick that taught this, because he taught it to me and then I showed it to someone, So it's a lot more complicated than just, I don't have a document that says Patrick picked a shamrock and walked over to a pagan guy and was like, this is the Trinity, this, look at it, we don't have any of that. Yeah. Okay. We talked about Patrick was Irish as a common misconception, because he wasn't.
Right.
We also talked about single-handedly converted the island, because that wasn't true. So, we have there are other missionaries, there were other people who came before him, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Let's see. There's a few others that don't have as much like information about. I think we saved that for more of like a hagiographic, like, whenever we should at some point sit down and just like, we're going to take this one story and we're going to pick it apart and just like think through the whole thing. So we can save some of those. there's some direct quotes that I pulled too from St. Patrick that kind of come from the Confessio, which is super interesting. Um, he had a kind of a St. Paul vibe in some of the ways that he wrote. Like, I, Patrick, a sinner, a most simple countryman, the least of all the faithful and most contemptible to many, right? And that definitely reminds me of Paul, but that's how he opens up his Confessio. There's some sense of like great sense of humility or insecurity. I always get like challenged by that because you'll have like these super holy people that they have this understanding that as I like get closer to God and the holier, or I guess the more I receive, or I'm open to receiving the gift of holiness from God in my life, the more of a wretch I understand. Like the more I see myself as a wretch, I understand that everything I have is gift, you know. So when you have somebody who has like the stature of a Saint Patrick or Apostle Paul, Saint Paul, that they still think of themselves like that despite all of the stuff that they've done or they've allowed God to do through them, that understanding helps them realize it's just like, I'm nothing. I'm absolutely nothing other than a vessel to receive the gift, So that's a challenge, especially for us in our, gig economy hustle culture, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most people don't have that level of humility at all.
Yeah, and then there's that fine line too, because God doesn't ask us to like talk down to ourselves or beat ourselves up. Like that's not what he's saying. Like humility is really speaking about yourself truthfully, It's speaking about yourself rightly. So I don't come in and say I'm the worst of all people because I don't want to get I want you to have pity on me, or I'm trying to draw attention to myself with my like, self-righteousness or piety, or it's not that. It's like saying I'm the worst of all sinners because I realize that even the good that I do, I only do because of the grace of Christ, But that's actually true for everybody, So there's a sense that recognition of the fact that there's nothing in me good that doesn't come from Christ, that I'm terrible, So there's just a lot to kind of tangle with there, and it's hard to wrestle with that in the right way without, like tearing yourself down, because you're not supposed to tear yourself down. That's not the point. So that's one.
So did the drinking for St. Patrick's Day just stem from the Irish culture, I guess, along with celebrating his feast day, probably?
Yeah, it comes with the feast day. Whenever you have like a feast, there's always, drinking involved. It's like St. Bridget's Lake of Beer, right? So like St. Bridget's feast day, I always drink beer. This is really the first year since that has happened, but we kind of set that up in our family. It's like St. Bridget's feast day. She wishes for a lake of beer for all the saints, right, at the table of like the feast of the resurrection, right, with Christ at the table. Beer would grow out of that, So it'd be interesting to have somebody who was really Irish also to talk to us about drinking beer at like Irish hoolie or like a party, like or what we might call a hoedown or a hootenanny around here, know. How prevalent is that? So I would say, if we want to go ahead and kind of pivot to like the feast day portion, like how do we celebrate? Well, there's a sort of a liturgical difficulty in the fact that St. Patrick's feast day falls during Lent, right? So you have the penance and life of living Lent, trying to kind of go through your sort of recommitting yourself, right? Cutting away the fat. And then you also have certain feast days like St. Patrick. And in some places, like in Ireland, it's like it's a major feast, right? So when you're there, you have like the solemnity of St. Patrick. Everybody celebrates it. It's ranked high enough that you don't necessarily have to worry about it. Other places, it sort of depends on your bishop, right? Like, if you have a large Irish population, your bishop might actually just, for that specific day, give everybody the dispensation to like drink and feast and eat meat. The St. Patrick's Day falls on a Friday, and during Lent, the Friday in Lent wins unless you have other guidance from your shepherd, right? Your bishop. So then you might celebrate by drinking beer and eating Irish foods that don't have meat, right? Because one thing that doesn't have meat in it is beer, right? So that's one thing that you can do. So that's one thing, it's all of the Lenten feasts are kind of like that. There's the competing thing. So one thing you could do, recommended again, Kendra Tierney, Catholic All Year Compendium. She talks about actually their huge St. Patrick's Day. They have like everybody come over to their house and they have like a great big party.
Nice.
But the way that they often will do that is they will hold that party at like the closest Sunday, because every Sunday is mini Easter, right? We talked about that. It trumps Lent, every Sunday. So if you want to have a great big St. Patrick party with beer and meat and all that fun stuff, beer and lamb or beer and corned beef or something like that, have it on Sunday and problem solved. It's not the actual feast day itself, but on the Sunday you can do whatever you want. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I never thought about them competing.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, but that's like, why that's the genius of Lent, why the 46 days, right? All the Sundays are not technically a Lent day.
Yeah.
Okay. So other ways you can celebrate it is go to Mass that day, obviously. You can pray the Liturgy of the Hours that day. There's a specific portion of the Liturgy of the Hours on most saints' days that is specifically written by them or about them in like the Office of Readings or in the Collect. There'll be a special meditation as part of the Liturgy of the Hours on St. Patrick.
Okay.
You obviously can go to confession because he himself had, every saint, really, they have this big emphasis on penance and repentance because they have an understanding of what that means to kind of go through this process of theosis or sanctification and become more like Christ. You find something new through God's grace that needs to be like rooted out. So in cooperation with God and the Holy Spirit, you do penance to try and ferret that thing out of your heart, but also you have to do something else to replace the vacuum there. You can't just leave it empty, right? Or else it will come back.
Well, yeah, that's interesting how currently in the Bible in the Year, they just covered, it's one of the books, I think it's Matthew, where Jesus is talking about all the parables, explaining them.
Yes.
It's the one about
the strong man.
No, it's the one with the empty house, or like with the spirits coming back into the house.
And 7 come back.
Yeah. And it, Father Mike talks about, and it really ties into Lent. Like, okay, you got rid of something.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean you can just put anything there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to be intentional about what's going to go there.
Yes. And I will probably repeat this. My kids, hopefully, when they go back, and part of the reason I wanted to do the podcast was so that they could, when I'm dead, they could go back and be like, "What did Dad think about things?" know. But when they go back and see this, it'll just be like, "Oh yeah, Dad always said nature abhors a vacuum." Right? That's the idea. And it's not just physical nature; it's spiritual nature. You can't. Some things are true regardless of whether it's material or not, and so if there's a gap, it will be filled by something, and the way our world works with trying to, monetize like literally everything, and that gap will get filled with some advertising thing, It always reminds me of like the Disney movie Inside Out, the triple dent gum.
We didn't see that. I
You
haven't
haven't
seen
seen
it.
Inside Out?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's this jingle because it's what it's doing is it's pointing out how you always remember the jingle. It just like gets embedded in your brain and you can't stop thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or have it your way at BK,
Mm.
right? You got it.
Right.
All that stuff is just like buried in your head. So in Inside Out, it's like triple dent gum, and
Okay.
there's this little jingle that goes with it. If you don't like actively put the good in there, advertising will steal your soul, right? It'll get those pieces of your head and take up all that space, and you'll think like that.
Yeah.
You'll think like what was on the commercial, or you'll just like walk around looking like everybody else who had the hook advertisement in them. So you have this kind of purse, you wear this kind of clothes, you wear this kind of shoes, because they were the ones that were able to penetrate deep into the market. And then just almost subconsciously, all of a sudden, you've been catechized by the marketing of the world, and you look like that.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because you look like whatever catechizes you. Right? That's another one of the things my kids are going to probably put on my tombstone. It's like the different colorings in people's hair, the way, whether you dress, like, are you a Hot Topic shopper, all of that kind of stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
the things that shape your brain will make you look a certain way, right? Which is why I dress like this, because I'm reading G.K. Chesterton and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and trying to live 100 years ago.
Yeah.
This is what you dress like. So anyway.
How many more things you got?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much.
I'm curious where the whole like pinch me if I'm not wearing green, or if that's just like something that was like Irish culture
I
that
have no
transferred,
idea where that came from. Let's find that
or if
out.
it's something that just happened over time. Because it's something I always forget about until the day of.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that arose later, of course. And so let's try and find that out, because I didn't dig so much into sort of the contemporary expression,
Right.
which is something that is obviously a fascinating thing. So now my tablet's going to sing and make a bunch of noise, by the way, into the microphone, probably. All right. So doing some quick research here. Oh, that's interesting. So green. Okay, so green apparently is tied to the Irish nationalism
That makes sense.
and rebellion. I think the original color was potentially blue, according to PBS. That is very interesting. So green, yeah, green is the revolutionary color against the Brits. And then the pinching might be American.
I wondered.
Yeah. So wearing green made you invisible to leprechauns, 18th century Irish American folklore. So if you aren't wearing green, you're not invisible to a leprechaun. A leprechaun is a trickster spirit,
Right.
and so it pinches you, right? So it harasses you because you're not
Game,
wearing
I like
green.
it.
Yeah. So that would be another super duper. That would be another super duper awesome episode. Is just like the evolution of the feast day itself,
Yeah.
more than just like let's talk a little bit about St. Patrick. So that'd be a good follow on, because there's the way this stuff evolves across time is just like fascinating. So that we could do like a Candlemas style episode on St. Patrick's Day as a follow on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I covered most everything. There's, another thing you might do on his feast day is, obviously enjoy Irish culture. Like you might eat lamb or corned beef. You can pray with the breastplate, like St. Patrick's breastplate, which is a prayer that has a few different versions, but that might be something that you do. Read the Confessio. That's something I tend to do on like even Martin Luther King Day. Like I'll go read the letter from Birmingham jail, for example, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So certain days where you want to do something, just go read what they wrote and just think about it, right? Remember them,
Okay.
you know. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it, you know.
Cool. Yeah. Definitely learned a couple little things.
What was your favorite thing?
I mean, getting kidnapped by pirates is pretty. Like, I wish that was on my resume.
Yeah. When you go and apply at your next tech gig, it's like, dude, it's kidnapped by pirates.
Yeah,
That's not a thing that you can do with ChatGPT.
that's cool.
You know?
Yeah, and just like living in a strange land, and
Yes.
yeah, that's cool.
Stranger in a strange land.
It's a good story.
Yeah, that's something I always connect to that, because when we lived in Japan, my wife and my two oldest daughters and myself, and which is where my third daughter was conceived, so she lived in Japan, just in the womb. Lindsay actually worked at a Christian school in Hamamatsu,
Okay.
and so I always tell myself, and even will mention this to the family, that we went to Japan so that Lindsay could do her mission there. It was just my job that got us there. But while we were there, she was working at a Christian school, teaching Japanese kids English, doing Bible studies with staff and different stuff like that.
Cool.
And I was, working on computer systems. Yeah. So we went to Japan for Lindsay. We just didn't know it, So, Stranger in a Strange Land. I mean, if you get the chance, I would recommend it for sure. Your world really opens up when you leave your small knothole and go live somewhere else. And that's largely why we're Catholic now. When I was in Japan, I was definitely not going to stay a kind of Stone Campbell Christian. It just didn't make sense. And there were mostly just Catholics and Pentecostals there. You had some Presbyterians and some Baptists and people who are doing their best. But when it kind of came down to it, if you were going to have what I would consider an authentic experience of the fullness of what Christianity is, you're going to be Catholic in Japan.
Yeah.
And if you were going to plug yourself into the Christian history of Japan, you were going to be Catholic. And so that's what we did.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I think we're good. Still, like, obviously our two main things are Substack and YouTube. Book Club is finishing up the Comfort Crisis soon.
Yeah.
Comfort
Crisis, April 9th, 2026. We'll be talking about this book.
It's an easy read. It's a good one, though.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of stuff in here that I've found helpful. Like there's a lot of chapters that try to cut through some of the myth of right now he's tackling, from where I am in the book, like pop nutrition.
Oh, okay.
Which is good because, how do you know what you should eat or how you should diet when everybody's getting rich off of telling you what to do?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a chapter in here about that. So if you're interested in your health and psychology, and this is going to be more from the scientific perspective, there's going to be like PhDs and science stuff cited in here. I would recommend it. There is some language in here, so if you're highly, highly, highly averse to that, keep that in mind. But this is there's a lot of good stuff in there. And so April 9th for that. I think that might be it. We're still on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that stuff, so you can listen or you can watch. Please support us on Substack. I've been writing an article that comes out every Wednesday, so at least once a week I'll have an article about something. Some of those articles, if you pay attention to them, are teasing like what's coming later in book club too. So there's some Easter eggs out there. So yeah, I think that should be it. You guys are great.
Yeah.
Thanks
for joining.